You're listening to the Loving Your Own Soul podcast, and I'm your host, Britt Olson. Guided by my own intuition, my intention is to deliver genuine conversations centered around health and wellness, spirituality, self-expression, and culture. In this space, I will provide you with real-life stories, theories, and inspiring perspectives to help you uncover and tap into your own true potential. I'm so grateful you've chosen to tune in with me on this mindful exploration to living a more fluid life through a deeper connection to the soul. Now let's dive into today's journey. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in here today. I am so excited to bring you this episode with Victoria Jane of Vital Becoming, where we will be talking all things human design. And Victoria is such an incredible soul. She's so sweet. She just has such a calming and reassuring energy about her. I know you guys are totally going to love her. I was so enthralled by her energy and just her ability to describe human design so articulately and in a manner of words that we can all really understand it. We also talked about a couple things that she actually hasn't talked about before, so that's kind of fun, some new information in case you may have heard her on previous podcasts before. For those of you who are new around here or maybe new to the term human design, we will go into detail as explained by Victoria. I don't want to butcher it for any of you, but we'll go into detail as to what human design is, the 5 different energy types, which are a generator, a manifesting generator, a manifester, projector, and a reflector, and all the juicy details that go into each type, and then human design as well as it pertains to the chakra system, I Ching, and just so much more. For those of you who don't know, I am a generator through and throughout. I've really enjoyed kind of practicing, trying to live more by my design here in the last year or so, and more importantly, the last couple months where I've really kind of jumped into it. In this episode, we also talk about eating for the different types and the different digestive systems, which is very interesting. I have actually kind of been playing around with more eating for my specific digestion type, as you'll hear Victoria and I discuss. But for me, I swear, since playing around with that, my stomach has never looked flatter. As some of you know, I've been on my own healing journey and just love assisting others in their own healing journey and trying to figure out any health problems that they are dealing with and just trying different ways of eating, but particularly eating in the human design type that is better for my digestive system. I have actually seen great results. And I do want to back up and say, while I say my stomach has never been flatter, I don't mean that from a vanity standpoint, because I don't encourage that outlook for anyone as it pertains to your health, but actually just as an immediate sign that something might be working that I'm doing. I've had more sustained energy, but more so since kind of trying to eat certain days per my human design type, that late afternoon or end of day bloat from eating all day hasn't been there for me. And that's what I mean by my stomach has been flatter, by not having that end of day bloat, which usually takes place. That's pretty common. To have that be gone is showing me that my body is responding well to what I'm doing and my body likes what I've been doing. So I will let you all listen and jump more into that. For anyone who's interested in connecting with Victoria, you can find her on Instagram at victoriajane.hd, and she is actually hosting a workshop this Thursday, July 30th at 5:30 p.m. PST, talking about the 2 different manifestation points that we can find in our chart. That is the specific and non-specific manifestation, which it is how it sounds, kind of figuring out the best ways that you can manifest in your life. So if you are interested in joining, which I highly recommend that you do, just simply send her a DM on Instagram at victoriajane.hd. And she will be able to send you the link to sign up and instructions on how to attend her workshop. So definitely hit her up there. But anyway, enough from me. Let's go ahead and jump in to today's episode as we deep dive into all things human design with Victoria Jane of Vital Becoming. Am I right in that you just recently made all your shifts this year?
Yeah.
6 months in.
I left my corporate job at the end of January, and it had been I had been thinking about it like the whole 6 months prior, but like, it's like when it actually happens, it's a whole different shift.
Totally, 100%. I love how you had just kind of mentioned just your awareness in terms of not understanding that you were living in and out of alignment and everything like that. What is your kind of like personal definition of living in alignment, and what does that term kind of mean to you?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with, I feel like I'm still figuring it out because just like the word like balance, I feel like alignment, it's a practice, right? It's not like you get to an aligned place and then you're done because like life keeps happening. But the way I guess I kind of like when I feel certain things, it's a good indicator to me to reflect like, oh, this might be me shifting out, like kind of like nudging towards out of alignment versus in. And it's kind of, I'm sure people have different words for it for themselves, but for me, often it'll be like attention, or I notice my thoughts kind of turning darker with justifications, like the need to, the should, and this sense of, I can actually feel it physically now too, because with my health journey and then also knowing more about my own human design, because I'm a projector, and the only energy center I have is, and we'll get more into human design, but the only energy center I have defined is the root center, which is all about adrenal energy. So I can actually kind of feel when I'm pushing myself too hard, I get like a pressure in my low back, and I'm like, oh, this is me like forcing myself to rev my engine as opposed to it actually being in alignment. And I guess in alignment feels like things are in flow. I talk about being in flow all the time, but I think we've all had moments of something just works out and it just feels so simple. And it doesn't mean that there's not work to do along the way, say if it's like a project, but it's like, we don't have to be in the driver's seat. It just kind of happens.
I love that. I love how you said that. And I'm so excited to chat deeper with you on human design and all the different energy centers, because I think what you said just right there about the root center is super fascinating. And one of the things that I love so much about human design is it just to me gives such a deeper understanding and connection as to why certain things take place for us, both internally and externally, and our reactions to things, just down to your root center being defined. And now you have awareness of that lower back pain and everything. So excited to get into that. And I know my listeners as well, human design is a topic that we haven't fully delved into. We've never had someone fully describe what it is, everything like that. I've mentioned it just casually here and there, and a couple of people have asked me like, oh, I've been seeing this word everywhere. What is it? So before we get into human design and all the nuances that come with it, with your journey, you mentioned you had some health issues and some different things, understanding that you're out of alignment and kind of making that big decision to not only make a career shift, but that shift also kind of affects all parts of life. Do you want to just jump into briefly a little bit of the backstory of that journey?
Totally. So yes, let's see where to start. So I guess I'll say through the lens of human design, have realized that the way my energy works is not kind of like what you see in the mainstream, which is this idea that if you're doing what you love, like, of course you should just be able to do it, right? And that's all great. And it is so true for some people. And I see you smiling, Britt, because you're a generator. And so I'm sure that's true for you.
Yes.
But I went through my whole life feeling like I was lazy, not productive. There was something wrong with me because I just need more rest, I think, than like certainly one of my parents. And so that was always kind of a shadow growing up. And then because of my upbringing, I really got a lot of worth out of my performance. And so that all kind of led into being really tied up with performing well at work once I was in an office setting and in a corporate job. And so what it looks like there, I guess my health journey started around 2017. So I'd already been working for a long time and more or less like seemingly doing fine on the outside. And then I started having blood sugar issues and gut issues and, followed the whole kind of natural route of working with a nutritionist and a functional medicine doctor and was kind of coping, but it never really went away. So I had to be super strict about like when I ate and taking like, walks after every meal and just like really managing blood sugar. And that was really kind of it was such a gift from the universe that was sort of nudging me like, hey, you should really examine like your lifestyle. But I was still mentally so attached to this idea that I literally couldn't imagine a world in which I wasn't kind of following this path. And a lot of my friends and community, I had made through school or through work. And so it just like wasn't even a possibility for me. So then I started getting worse and worse health issues to kind of nudge me out of it. So I ended up having more burnout and more hormone imbalance, to the point where I wasn't sleeping like at all in 2019.
Wow.
And of course, with that comes like mental health stuff, right? Because if we're not sleeping, your brain is just not working well. And so that really ultimately finally like it got bad enough that I was finally willing to make a change. So, I mean, it was so hard, but I'm also so grateful for it, because without it, I don't know, it would have just taken me a lot longer to get here, I think.
100%. I always like to say things don't happen to you, they happen for you.
Exactly.
And I think just, nothing's perfect. We can't go back in time, but just in understanding your health journey and some of the struggles and everything, almost quote unquote, the suffering that has brought you to where you are today, may not be able to have the awareness that you do without incurring some of those decisions and everything like that. As a projector, was the decision to quit your corporate job and take a different route kind of change that in your life? Was that harder for you given your energy type, or was it just something where you knew this is what I have to do?
No, it was like, gosh, it's so funny because I truly believe we all have like a higher self part of us that is guiding us. And so there was a part of me that knew, like, I remember discovering human design, and for years it was on my manifestation list to, I think it was something I put it as, I wanted to like live the projector lifestyle. And I had no idea like what that meant. I was still fully in my job, but it was like part of me knew this is what I want my life to look like. This is how I want to feel, which included getting lots of sleep and like being able to make all my meals in a kitchen, just something where, and not be in an office and have a lot more space and spaciousness. But then on the other hand, there's another like conscious part of me that was maybe even delusionally like, no, I got it. Like, I'm going to keep going. And so I think I've forgotten your question by now, but there was this tension, and really what got me to change was it getting so bad that the people in my life were like, you're constantly cranky and grouchy and mean. You are so exhausted. I was so exhausted that the only thing I could do on the weekend was just sit and watch Netflix all day. And like, I don't really watch TV. So to me, that was a sign. But again, I was still deluding myself, and I was like, no, like, I can keep doing this. I have to keep doing this because what else can I do?
Right. You don't have another choice.
Right. Which is totally a false belief.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it got so bad that I had lost my cycle. So like I had no hormones left, and I was telling my therapist, and she was like, oh, that's like kind of serious. And I was like, what? And her saying that, I remember breaking down to tears and sobbing, because it was the first time, for whatever reason, I mean, lots of people have been saying things to me, but her level of compassion in saying that allowed me to see my own suffering in a way that I had just put up walls, right? And so with that, I was like, okay, there's something seriously wrong with what I'm doing, and it will require me to make a change and do something scary, but I just have to do it. And so before quitting, I actually took a 3-month medical leave from work. And that was kind of the gateway, because I was able to leave, but not feel like I had to totally jump off the cliff. And then as I healed over those 3 months, I felt more and more tired as time went on, which was also scary. But it was like, I finally had this space to feel tired. And I was like, oh, I've actually been this tired the whole time, and I didn't know. And so that was another kind of, just watching that unfold for myself really convinced me. And I finally opened up to like all the things I had been numb to.
Absolutely. It's almost that outer body experience in a way, where it's kind of like you're watching yourself and start understanding just all the little bits and pieces that have kind of compiled into where you are. And what you said earlier about just needing the rest and quote unquote labeling that as being lazy, I think is something that so much of us struggle with. I mean, I even struggle with it myself, of like, oh, I just feel like I need to go sit on the couch. But then I'm like, no, I can't go sit on the couch because that's lazy, and I need to be doing something. And it's just that upward battle.
Yeah. I mean, we all do, because that's unfortunately the society kind of like narrative that we live in, which is more is always better. Fast is always better. This is why, sharing human design is like it's not everything. I see it as a tool, not like the gospel, but I find it's a really helpful way to get people to understand like, oh, you don't have to be pushing all the time. Things can still work out if you don't do that.
Yes. One of my good friends is a projector, and pulled up her chart, and I don't, just know the baseline of it. But upon her understanding a projector and some of her needs, such as the need to rest and everything like that, she was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. It was like her whole world just opened up by reading just a couple descriptions. And she's like, oh, I don't have to feel guilty about this anymore. This is solely who I am. which is so cool. When and how did you first discover human design?
Yeah, so I've been into like yoga and spirituality and personal growth for years. And so I came across it when I was doing other kind of personal development stuff. And it was mentioned in the context of manifestation. And so from there, in true projector fashion, I was like, oh, great. I now need to learn everything about this. And like bought all the books and listened to all the podcasts. So that was about 3 years ago.
Okay. Cool. Which is kind of on the brink a little bit of it. I feel like it's really grown legs in the last, 8 months to a year, maybe.
Yeah. Has it felt like that to you? Because I feel like I've been in it, so I can't really tell. I'm just like, yeah, it's always on my mind.
Totally. And then there's still people today who have never heard anything about it, which I find interesting. But we all have our own journey within that, so to say, in discovering human design and just other facets of spirituality and everything. All of us, we kind of each go through our own different spiritual awakenings and journeys and everything like that. In your process of going through personal development and yoga and everything, were there certain modalities that kind of open different doors spiritually for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful to yoga for being like, again, the gateway where that, like I did my teacher training in 2012 and I had been practicing before then. And it was the first context in which I realized, well, a few things. One, that like my thoughts are not me, which is like, mind blowing when you first realize that. And then I had in high school, I had a past with like disordered eating and being sort of over exercising, orthorexic type stuff. And so to find a space where I could move my body, but not feel like I was punishing myself, just like that gentleness, the safety of it was also really profound. So that was kind of the first step. And I think a lot of us start through the body first because it's physical form. And then we start to kind of get more energetic and so forth. So from there, I'm trying to think of other like key points. I think meditation was a big piece. And, I started with your straightforward kind of mindfulness stuff. But what's been really big for me in the last few-ish years is, I don't know if you're familiar with Yoga Nidra.
I love Yoga Nidra.
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, it's not like your typical, asana practice. You're lying down the whole time, and it's similar-ish to meditation, but it's much more guided. And there are a couple sort of things that make it different. For me, Yoga Nidra was huge because it really helps heal my nervous system. Again, we talked about burnout and all this stuff. And so I was just constantly in a state of fight or flight. And so having a really regular Yoga Nidra practice was physically very soothing. And then there are deeper parts of the practice where you are able to tap into the subconscious mind space. And from there, that's a whole doorway to other sort of personal growth work around healing trauma and shifting kind of mindset patterns and behaviors. And then really like into the realm of like sober altered states of consciousness, right? Like when we start to tap into like, oh, it felt like I was in this dream and it was real, but it wasn't, I was here, but was I asleep? Like not really. And so spending a lot of time in that space where what's happening is real, but it's not in the 3D, and becoming really acquainted in that has just really strengthened my intuition and allowed me to trust my own inner voice more deeply.
Which can be so hard to trust initially, but it's so important. It's so funny. When I first discovered Yoga Nidra, I was living in New York City at the time, which was 7 or 8 years ago, maybe, and had tried it. And at that point, I was just burning myself to a pulp as a generator, wasn't aligned with saying yes to things that I should have said no to. And it was just nonstop, had a blast, so much fun, but was just, burning it at both ends entirely. But I found Yoga Nidra, loved the concept of it, went to 3 classes, and every single one, I was so exhausted at the time. I just fell asleep and passed out cold and got so embarrassed come the 3rd one that I just completely stopped going.
Oh no.
And then since then, the last few years have reincorporated Yoga Nidra back into my practice at a point where it makes much more sense for me and where I can really tap in with the different conscious and unconscious levels and everything like that. And it's such a beautiful practice.
Yeah. That's so funny. It's like a funny story, but also like, I want to say, no shame in that. Like, it's so common. And because after I got really into it, I also did a separate sort of additional training and was teaching, and there's always people snoring, and it's like, if that's what you need, that's so important too. Right.
100%, which now I understand that completely. But at the time it was, so funny.
I know. Cause it's like after those classes, people aren't really social. So you're like, I don't know. And you just kind of like, slink out.
Exactly. There's not really that community of let's talk about it, or everyone falls asleep.
Someone can tell you it's okay. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. With that, for those who are not familiar with human design, do you want to go into a little bit about what it is, kind of where it started? Did the founder, did he start it on psychedelics? Or is that
unclear?
Okay.
He channeled it, so we can like fill in we can assume whatever we want to assume.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's actually, earlier we were talking about how it feels like it's blowing up, but there's still a lot of people who don't know about human design, and I think that makes a lot of sense given that the system is quite new. It was channeled in the late 80s. Ra Uru, the founder, he was teaching people personally, kind of like the first generation of human design folks, up until I think the early 2000s. And as a result, it's like that was sort of the first wave, and now I feel like there's this second wave of people who are talking about human design on the internet. Yes. And in terms of what it is, I like to call it a system that helps us live in more flow with our natural energy and gift. And the way in which it does that is we take your birth date time and then we put it in and you get a chart. And if you look at it, you'll see it's quite complex. There's like a little picture of a human with different shapes on it, and then lines and numbers and stuff around the sides and arrows. And
it looks very foreign.
Yeah.
And it pulls from, what is this?
Totally. And it pulls from 4 different systems. So there's a lot of information like packed in there. It uses the chakra system, the Kabbalah, the I Ching, and astrology. So that all combines, and everybody falls into a specific type. And that's kind of the foundational piece. So we could go so deep, but the highest level that I think is so helpful for anyone to know is, what is your type? And then based on your type, there's a strategy, which is basically how you best exchange your energy with the world, and your authority, which is your unique intuition. And it turns out people have different ways to tap into their intuition. So I'm sure we've all heard the advice like, oh, just go with your gut, like trust your gut. What does your gut feel? And that's true for maybe 70% of the population, but for the other 30% of us, we literally don't feel that in the same way. So just like, that's a small example of how human design can be so tailored to what is true for you specifically.
I love it. And what design types fall into that 70% of the population versus the 30%?
Totally. So 70% of the world has what's called a sacral center defined. And so if you are familiar with yoga, which I'm sure a lot of listeners are, the sacral center is like that second chakra energy. So you feel it in your gut, kind of like below the belly button pelvis, and it relates to that primal creation energy. So it's creativity, it's sensuality, it's desire, it's what makes plants grow and the seasons turn. And so when somebody has this, what we call defined or filled in, it means that they have this as a stable source of energy that they're constantly producing, and it's innate to them. So that's 70% of the world, and the 2 types that have that are generators and manifesting generators. And so these are the people who, when they are doing something they like, they can go all day. They don't need to take a break because they're just so excited about it. This inner fire, literally, that they can tend to by, putting more logs of like the things that I love doing on it, and it helps them burn even brighter. And I'm sure, Britt, when you're doing something you like, it's like you can get psyched about it, and then other people, you can see that effect on other people.
100%. And it is a true night and day difference compared to when I'm doing something that does not light me up and that I'm not excited about. And my husband, he's even commented on it, because I'm someone who come 8 p.m., really between 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., my brain pretty much just shuts off, and I can open up a book, read a couple pages, and fall right asleep until 5 a.m. And then once the sun starts rising, I'm like, up out of bed, let's go. However, there'll be other times when, if I'm working on a project that I'm so enthralled with and just can't get enough of it, I can go until 2 a.m. And then, and he jokes, he's like, I just don't understand how for someone who can fall asleep at 8 p.m., how randomly you have the ability to just work all night on things. And I'm like, well, it's really in better understanding human design. And it's just when something lights me up that much, it's like, I just can't get enough of it.
That is the perfect example of the sacral energy working, because it's funny you mentioned like being able to fall asleep so quickly, because I've noticed that with my MG partner as well, because the sacral energy, if you have it when you have it, and then when it's done, it knows when it's done. And in human design language, the sacral center, if you have it, you know when enough is enough. So when you're done being awake, you're like, all right, I'm out. Like, no problem. And I'm always so jealous because for people who have projectors or manifestors and reflectors, we don't have a sacral center. So we pick up other people's energy. And I know for me and for many projectors, falling asleep takes time. We have to actually let kind of the stuff of the day empty out. So it's like, I'm always so jealous when he's just like, okay, I'm going to go to bed, and he's out.
So funny. So my husband is a manifester. Yeah. And because I fall asleep so quickly, he does not. He would actually time me when we first started dating, how long it would take me to fall asleep. And he said it would always land somewhere between 20 to 36 seconds was my time frame as to how quickly, once I was like, okay, I'm going to bed and close my eyes. He was like, that's how quickly you could fall asleep. And he, being the manifester, was still to this day is so jealous and just doesn't understand that. So
that's hilarious. That's for generators and MGs. And then there's a third type, manifestors, like your husband. For them, they also have energy, but it's not in the same kind of like almost like circadian rhythm where it's like I wake up in the morning, I have a full tank. The manifestor energy is a little more like a quick spark. It's like they have the lighter to kind of like start the fire, but they're not constantly burning in the same way. And so the manifestor, their purpose, because every type has a purpose, and we have exactly the number of people in each category that we need to have a well-functioning collective. Manifestors are really here to start something. So their energy is cool. Like I just have this urge to do something. I'm going to like go plan the party or like go for the run, like come if you want. Through them doing exactly what they want, they create kind of the ripple effect for everybody else to also join in.
And then what about yourself as the projector? Projectors and reflectors are one I know, smaller piece of the population, also ones that I'm not too super familiar with myself.
Yeah. So projectors and reflectors are considered non-energy types, whereas the first three that we just talked about, again, when you're doing what you love, you can keep doing it. Manifestors, they obviously need to take breaks in a different way. But if they're doing something that they're super into, I know a lot of manifestors, they'll go for like a 2 to 3 week work sprint and then be like, that was so awesome. And then, they'll have a more like chill period. But for projectors, we don't have a sacral center, and we also don't have that manifestor energy, which is, to get really technical, it's like they all have some energy going to their throat so that they can really easily sort of put their energy into the world. For projectors, we actually feel into other people's energy. And so this is where like the resting comes into play, because while we're with people, I know for myself in an office environment, I could go in and get so much done and be so productive. But then as soon as I left, I would have this crash of like, oh, now I'm just by myself in my own energy. The thing for projectors is our purpose is to guide energy, right? We're open in our charts in a way that allow us to feel into what are people doing? What do people want? What are they desiring? Right. And then because, we aren't energy types, we have this gift to be able to figure out, okay, how do I make this more efficient, better, innovative? And then we share that with the world. So the strategy for a projector, and I'll circle back, I realized we didn't talk specifically about strategy for the other types. The strategy for projector is to wait for what's called the invitation, because as guides, right, even though projectors might feel like they know the answer to everything, it's not really that awesome to just be like telling people what they need to do, right? We want to make sure that there's actually space for this to be received and that it's going to be useful to the person. And so that's where strategy starts to connect back to living in alignment, because a lot of projectors feel the pressure or maybe the hunger to be seen, to to feel successful and validated. So they're like, oh, let me just tell everyone my brilliant ideas. But then it could result in that out of alignment feeling of, oh, maybe people aren't seeing me, or maybe this is falling on deaf ears. And so strategy helps us remember how to live more in flow as we learn for ourselves, like what we don't need to control so much.
Cool. I could totally see that with some of the few projectors that I do know.
Yeah,
for sure.
And just to be really clear, for the generators and the MGs, their strategy, because they have that really strong gut energy, is to only take action after they feel that excitement in their gut. Because as I'm sure you know, like if you force yourself to do something that you're not into, it just isn't going to go very far, right? So thinking about alignment, the things that are going to be most in alignment for you are the ones that both give you energy, right, and lift other people up.
100%.
And then the strategy for manifestors is to initiate. So for them, because their purpose is to really start things, it feels out of alignment and kind of stuck and stifling for them to keep themselves small or worry about, like what effect this might have. It's actually so much more liberating for them to be like, okay, I'm going to go do this because I feel like it and it's awesome, and not have any shame or doubt about it. And that, of course, is a lesson as well. I often feel like people come in with the kind of thing they need to learn or the wound they need to heal, but ultimately that is a manifestor in their most aligned state.
Makes sense. That's cool.
And then reflectors, haven't forgotten about them. So reflectors are the rarest type. They're about 1% of the population. And the reason that is because their purpose is to reflect back to whoever their community is, what's going on for them. Because their chart is unique in that every single center is open or white. And when we have a center that's not colored in, that's white, it means that we are receptive to other people's energy. So a reflector with all white centers is so receptive to other people's energy that just by going through their day and their experience, they can feel what's going on for everybody. And so in the wisdom that comes with that, their purpose is to then talk about what's going on for them, because they're actually talking about what's going on for everyone. So I imagine them, if we were all a tribe and we had different types, reflectors are the ones who are kind of standing by the campfire at the end of the night and telling stories about their day. And we're all just sitting and listening and like, yeah, like that is how it felt. Or like, I am really touched by that. And there's some insight that we get just from being around reflectors.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's probably exhausting for reflectors taking in so much energy, or?
Well, so this is the thing. I think for reflectors, it's really important and profound to realize they're reflectors, because with any type, including reflectors, when you're living in alignment, it's so easy, right? Being in alignment, when things feel in flow, like that feels really good. Where it can get hard is in human design, there's this term called the not self, which is like when we cling on to what's not really us, whether that's out of pressure or, some expectation. And so for reflectors, if they feel like they need to know who they are, or they feel like they kind of hold back from letting themselves really participate in life, then that's going to feel really stuck, right? But if reflectors can kind of open up and just almost surrender in a way, because for them, I imagine reflectors, like the way they move through life is like they're on a kayak and like life is just carrying them. It's like the river, because they're meant to, meet someone totally random and then feel how excited they are about some activity or project or whatever. Now, that said, there is an aspect of, in order to live in this really aligned state, we have to cultivate the conditions, right? So for reflectors, it's so important that whenever they don't feel comfortable, whether that's in an environment or with a group of people, that they don't like compromise on that, because they are so open. Like you said, it could be tiring if a reflector is with a group of people, like their friends is not supportive to them, because they're going to pick up, let's say it's like, a negative group of people. They're going to pick up the negative energy. It's going to affect them so deeply in a way that you or I, like we both can't imagine it, because we have defined centers. And so that can be hard if there's, again, the guilt of like, oh, well, I don't want them to be mad at me. I've known these people forever. Like I have to, whatever. So boundaries are huge for reflectors, because once you start making those positive choices, and I guess this part goes for everyone, when you start taking that little leap of faith to say, okay, maybe I'm going to, as a generator, say no to that thing, or as a reflector, this restaurant feels weird and it's fine if people think I'm like overly sensitive. I'm just going to go with it. And you start to you start to value like your own needs, and it doesn't have to be in a mean way, right? But just like, hey, like I'm feeling weird about this and that's valid. Let's figure out something else that will work for all of us. That's really important.
Which can be so hard to do in our society, because I think all of us across the board, at least a lot of us, we're so prone to people pleasing and not wanting to disrupt the energy and everything like that. With you in working with clients and everything, which, by the way, I think it's so cool that you've taken this passion and turned it into a human design coaching business, because I really do think that there's so much people can get out of understanding their own types and tapping in to all of that. But when you have clients or people who are maybe just kind of, whether they don't connect with their design type because they're that far out of alignment, or are almost just feeling very apprehensive about it, is there any, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk broad across all types, but is there anything that you do with your clients or that people can do if they're feeling completely out of alignment with their own type at trying to tap back in a little bit better?
I love this question. So I have like a few different thoughts. I guess the first one is, it's really interesting as I've worked with more people, seeing the categories in which people fall when I start telling them about their charts. Mm-hmm. There are people most people come in and they've already know a little bit about human design or like want to learn more about themselves. And so, but are somewhere out of alignment. So I talk to them and they're like, oh my gosh, like this relief of like, I feel so seen, like, oh my gosh, I'm not, selfish or lazy or whatever. And so a lot of people do resonate. Then there are some people who, for whatever reason, they just heard about it, but maybe they haven't been in that space as much. And so like you're talking about, they're like, they hear it and they're like, okay, like I'm going to have to think about that. I'm not really sure how that's sitting with me. And I'll circle back on that. And then there's like a very, very small percentage of people, but I have had them. It's probably like less than 5% who are already living in alignment so much that I tell them and they're like, oh yeah, cool. That's what I do already. And I'm like literally the whole, hour. And I'm like, what? And it's great, but I love it because it just proves that you don't have to know your design to live in alignment. But even those people, they're like, this is just so affirming. I was doing all these things and it's a little different from the mainstream, but I know it feels good. And it's good to know that like, this is like how I work. This is who I am.
Absolutely. Getting that confirmation is so nice, whether it's human design or working with different mediums or healers, even just through the lens of astrology as well. I've found a lot of the confirmations and just affirming who I am just takes you to another heightened sense of awareness and love for yourself. It's really cool.
Totally. And it's so human, right? I think we all want to know ourselves and understand ourselves. So those are kind of like the flavors of where people fall. And so for those people who they're like, I'm not sure if this resonates or not, or like maybe it doesn't resonate at all because I'm an MG and I feel tired or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. I think my first thing is if it doesn't resonate, I am never going to be one to try to force it to happen, right? I mean, so much of what human design is, you are your own authority. Like nobody can tell you what's right for you. And if it's not landing or you think this is like all crazy, don't force yourself to do it, right? Mm-hmm. That's one kind of situation. Now there might be the person who's like, I don't see it, but like maybe I'm still interested in testing it out. And that is a beautiful place to be because it's called the human design experiment. That's what the founder talked about all the time. And depending on how out of alignment you are, a lot of these things you may have never felt. For example, I'm thinking about authority, which is the voice of your intuition. And for some folks, their intuition is sort of like at the nervous system level. And for some folks, maybe they're so out of alignment, they're like, I have no idea what that even feels like. And that's totally fine. It can take time. We were talking about this earlier. There's so much pressure to know immediately, to go so fast, but the process of self-understanding and self-growth can't really be sped up, right? You are where you are. And so I think this is not maybe like so, sometimes I feel like I can like imagine myself being a listener and be like, I want a more specific piece of advice. And this is much more like surrendered, but when this resonates, it'll resonate, right? If you're not there yet, that's okay too.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think if there's anything like more tactical that would be helpful to say for that person.
I know it's hard because it's kind of also we're all individuals as well.
Yeah.
And
well, do you know of anyone who like was maybe yourself or a friend who heard their design and was like, I'm not sure?
I actually haven't. Everyone who either I've introduced to it or we've talked about it because they've known it before, it's been that immediate kind of holy shit type of connection.
Yeah. I think the most common one that I see is generators and MGs feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to have a lot of energy, but they don't. That's like the most common one. And to that, I would say, part of the strategy of responding from your gut is it's not just saying yes to the things that are fun and exciting. It's also saying no to what isn't. And that can be hard. And it can also be like a process, right? Like, for example, if you're in a job you don't like and you're feeling really exhausted all the time, like, depending on your situation, it might not be feasible to just quit tomorrow and like do something else. But just having that awareness and starting to pay attention to like, okay, so this is how my energy feels when I'm, at a workout class with a friend versus Monday morning when I'm commuting into the office. You start to develop that connection with yourself, right? And then that is the foundation of trust that we all need to build with ourselves, and no one else can do that work for you. That allows you to take that next step to, leave your job or draw a boundary or whatever it is. I think developing trust, however that looks for you, is a really good place to start.
Yeah, I love that. Trust is so important, in all realms. For anyone who maybe doesn't know the exact time when they were born, is there any insight into that in terms of trying to, because I feel bad, there's a couple people who they're just nobody knows they know it was in the morning, but not the exact time.
Okay. So they don't have like a range. It's like, it could be like 6 a.m. to noon.
Yeah. It's like an AM to PM range.
Yeah. So for those folks, there is a process called, the word is escaping me right now. I'll remember the word in a second. It starts with an R, but there's intuitives that can help you figure out your birth time essentially. And they all have different methods. So I actually don't know too much about it,
sure.
But I can get some recommendations. But in general, I have worked with a handful of people who are like, I don't think the time on birth certificate is right because every, astrology reading I have doesn't resonate. Or I know some people who are like, it was between, 10 a.m. to noon. And I will just kind of run through their charts and see if it changes. And most of the time we can get like an 80-20 or a 90-10. And there are just a few things that are different that I just want to talk about. And usually it won't change like an energy type or something like that.
That's neat. Yeah. I wasn't sure if there was a way to try to figure it out or not. So
yeah. I mean, you do want to work with someone. You can do it yourself and just kind of look, but you want to make sure that you know all the parts of your chart. So you're checking everything.
Cool. I love it. We had spoken a little bit earlier about you going through some just different eating patterns and health and things like that throughout your life. With the 5 different types, is there any particular right way to eat or foods that are better for the types than others?
Yeah. So there's a whole part of human design that talks about what is the best way to eat for each person. It's not the energy type. It's actually kind of, you won't see it in like a free chart that you pull up, but the first arrow on the left side, there's additional information underneath it if you have the intense human design software. And there are 6 different digestive types. Well, technically there's 12 because you can have the arrow going left versus right. And then there's 6 different types plus the left, right. I have found for myself, it's been really healing to know my digestion in human design because it affirmed the way that I ate as a kid, but was kind of shamed out of. So as a projector, we don't have that sacral center, right? So it's almost like we don't have a battery to store our extra energy. So I was always kind of like nibbling and snacking as a kid. And there's a lot of mainstream advice that's like, no, just like have 3 square meals a day, right?
Right.
And so I remember like as a kid, being told like, oh, stop being a bird. Like, why are you always picking at things? Like, just sit down and like finish your meal. And so that all got kind of patterned in. That kind of, I know, played a role in some of my stuff. But just learning like, oh, that is how I'm meant to eat as an adult took off like so much relief because I have experimented with all sorts of things. And like, fasting was a big thing for a while, which was like terrible for me. And I felt so bad about it because I was like, well, there seems to be all this like medical literature that it's good for you. Ultimately, we're all so unique, right?
That's so interesting. That would actually be so freeing.
Do you know your digestion? I can look at it right now if you don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I would be very curious because I've played around pretty much with everything at this point. Definitely a guinea pig in that realm.
Yeah. So, and I will say like there are some general tips for eating by your energy type. Like I said, for projectors, it's good to eat. It's often very supportive to eat more often. And for you as a generator, because you have this really strong sacral energy, which is like, it's always telling you, am I into this or not? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So choosing to eat things that are like actually exciting to you. I know it might sound sort of small and silly, but every time you favor something that is actually exciting versus like I should eat a salad or whatever, you're giving yourself more energy, right? It's like a micro way to practice that.
Yeah. Energy in, energy out. Same.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, I don't know, if you're like out at a restaurant and they're like out of the thing you want to order, or and then you order something that doesn't taste good to you, just order something else. Like, what's the big deal? You know?
Totally. Or just because everyone else is eating that way doesn't mean that if that's not exciting to you,
Absolutely.
You don't have to, which I've done so many times. I've dealt with all different food fear, even went through a part of my life, some that still kind of comes back to haunt me, of if nobody else is eating, I have a hard time mentally, psychologically getting myself to eat, even though I'm actually hungry. However, I understand that with my sacral center, how detrimental that is to me, because inside I'm like, please, I want to do this so badly, but kind of limiting yourself in that regard. Or just the same thing of like, oh, everyone's eating a salad, but I want the sandwich, but I'm going to eat the salad. And then you eat the salad and you're like, well, I don't want this anyway. So
yeah. And then it like doesn't taste good and you're like, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you're aware of that and kind of like hopefully able to act on it a little more.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So your specific digestive system is, it's the oldest one. So it's the first one, and your arrow is going to the left, which means in general, your mind is more active. Your brain, like your little physical brain, is more active than someone with their arrow going to the right. So you will need more food than someone whose arrow is going to the right. That's kind of like just on the spectrum. Making sure that you're feeding yourself enough is important. And then, so with the left facing arrow in the first type, you have a consecutive appetite. And if you think back to like the caveman days, right? Our digestive system then was all about eating whole, fresh, local, seasonal, all that stuff. So for you, with this digestive system, what you eat is really important. For some of the other types, it's more about the conditions in which you eat, whether or not more during the day or more at night, or whether or not there's like sound going on in the background or not. Conditions are not so important for you. It's really about what you eat. And then the consecutive part, so I'm sure, actually, maybe I'll pause here. I'm sure you probably already eat pretty healthy, so that might not be so challenging.
But I can tell a difference in eating whole foods versus processed foods. Like for me, eating a whole food, mostly plant-based, I'll still eat meat here and there. I don't label myself by anything like that. But I can totally tell a difference in when I have the good, whole, healthy foods compared to a meal that was maybe on the go or more processed. Just headaches, digestion, everything is completely different. So that would make sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, you feel like literally physical effects. It's not just like whatever.
Almost sick and always in my head, which is interesting.
Yeah. And it's because like, your body with an older digestive system, it feed me things that I can recognize. If you're having, I don't know, like Siete chips, it's like, what is this? Even though it's kind of healthy, right? It's at least not like whatever. And then, so then the consecutive part, this part is really interesting. I'll just preface this with, in no way is this meant to be like another food rule, right? This is just something to know. And like, if you notice it or you can experiment with it, great, but like not anything to be obsessive about. Consecutive appetite is essentially eating mono meals, one thing at a time. And again, because the old digestive system, cavemen, they found like sweet potatoes grow, like wild sweet potatoes, and that's what they had for a week or whatever, right? And it wasn't like, oh, they show up at Whole Foods and there's 10 different things they can buy.
Yeah.
So for the consecutive person, having like, I don't know, a couple bananas for breakfast instead of granola and honey and bananas on yogurt, that would be simpler and more supportive for your body. Now, there is an extent to which this one can sometimes be hard, right? Like if you're going out and like, I don't know, you're like grabbing something on the go and everything is a sandwich or a salad and there's lots of ingredients. But to the extent that you can kind of keep it simpler, that's like something that would be kind of like my main takeaway. I was talking to someone who has this digestive system, and she was saying like, I notice I feel better and digest a salad better if there's 4 things in it versus 10. So again, this doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Try it, or any reactions as I'm telling you this?
Yeah. Yes, in that I do. I practice food combining in terms of being aware, mostly with fruit especially. I've noticed I'd eat just plain whole fruit and do so well off of that. I've been trying to play around with different things in terms of still noticing some bloating and different combinations. So I'm very curious to try even more mono eating and experiment, and just to kind of notice the difference in my body.
Yeah.
I'd be shocked if I didn't see a difference. So
that really would be cool. So actually, I really want you to tell me how that goes if you try it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I'll probably try it tomorrow, to be honest.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's like a little taste into the detailed sort of like nutritional information about the chart. But again, it's going to be different for different people.
So fun. I love the depth of human design and everything. So you mentioned that it kind of follows the chakra system. Mm-hmm. Are the centers, is it to a T?
No, because in the chart, there's 9 centers, and in the chakra system, it's 7. Mm-hmm. So like the bottom ones kind of line up, right? You have the root, first chakra, second chakra, and then the top kind of lines up. It's the crown and the ajna. But the middle kind of gets all mixed up. For example, like chakra system, heart chakra, 4th chakra, right? In human design, the ego center is related to the physical heart, but then there's the emotional center, which is feelings, right? Which is also kind of the heart in the traditional chakra system. But then in human design, the emotional center is called the solar plexus. So it starts to get kind of mixed up there.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. In looking at the authorities and everything like that with emotions, I believe I have an emotional authority.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just lost your chart page. I think based on the time that I put in that she gave me, you look like you have a sacral authority.
Oh,
is
yes.
That different from? Yeah.
No, it is sacral authority. Okay. There's something with the emotion though that I cannot.
Well, so when you have an open emotional center, we feel into other people's emotions.
That's what it was. I thought that was interesting. I wanted to go into just a little bit of detail what that means exactly.
Totally. So there is a center in the chart that relates to emotions, and it's interesting because, again, everything shows up in the exact proportion we need as a collective. So for the emotional center, it's 50-50. Half of the people are open like you and me, and the other half, when you have it defined similar to the sacral center, you're creating energy all the time. So people who have a defined emotional center where it's colored in, you're always creating emotional energy and sending it out. It's like many people may have heard emotions are energy in motion. So there's just this, there's highs and lows. And for people with a defined center, it's just happening all the time without any like conscious thought. And so it's a huge thing for emotional people to realize they can feel high or low for no specific reason in their life at all. It just kind of happens because it's just that energy, like moving, like the waves of the ocean. For open emotional people, we're calm, cool, and collected on our own if we're not around other people. And then how it comes together is we need each other to feel, because open emotional people, in feeling out like what's going on with the people you're at or when you're out in the crowd, we actually get to sample all the different emotions available to us in life as humans. So we become wise in all of the full emotional spectrum. For people who have a defined emotional center, they're always in their experience, right? So it's actually really helpful for them to be around non-emotional people because we reflect back to them what they're feeling. We might, be in conversation with someone as an open person like you or me and be like, oh, I'm noticing you're like kind of sad. Like what's going on? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Like I was kind of feeling a little low. Like, let me tell you all about it. And so there's this interaction that we get from each other.
Cool. I could totally see that. Is it with that reaction for anybody else who has that? Is it would you say that it's maybe harder to be in groups of people and things in terms of feeling all of those different emotions? Yeah. Or being receptive to them, I should say.
Totally. I think, again, this really depends on where you're at because there's not any part of the chart that's ever bad or heavy. So for open emotional people, it only becomes challenging if we feel like we need to resist or that something like will happen that's out of our control. But when we start to realize like, okay, I can feel other people's stuff, but it doesn't have to be mine, then we can let it go, right? It's like, we don't want to feel things and have them get stuck, but if we can feel it and then let it go, then that's exactly what should be happening, right? That's the aligned way, because it's like, that's our role to play in the world. So having really clear emotional boundaries obviously is huge. I often talk to people about like ways to clear energies. For example, I was just talking to someone who works in a hospital the other day, and I was giving her some tips on like smudging and like using salt and that kind of thing. And it'll be different for different folks, but finding something that allows you to let go of what's not yours.
Yeah. I could totally see that. It's so funny. This morning in my morning meditation, I kept hearing the word smudge stick, and I finished, did my journaling, went about a couple of things, and then was about to get started working again. And that word came up again. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. I really haven't cleared any energy in my house or in my workspace in a while. So I took the time, did it, and just instantly felt that little sense of relief and kind of regrounded and just so much more collected. So could totally see that. Within human design, there's also, I mean, it's such an in-depth science, if you will. There's also the gates that take place. Do you want to, I know those are pretty intricate, but maybe explain just a little bit about what those are.
Totally. So the gates are the I Ching part of human design. So there are 64 gates, and they're based on each of the hexagrams in the I Ching. And so they're all different like energies that are present in humanity. And whatever gates you have are your innate gifts or skills, and they can range across all different things. So maybe I'll just share some examples. Like, actually, let me look at your chart again and see if there's any fun ones to talk about. For example, you have gate 1. And so if you start with just 1 at the very beginning, it's like, this is like a brand new chapter, right? So people with gate 1, well, they're good at it, and they also want to create newness as a form of self-expression. So it's important for you to be doing something that, whether that's, I don't know, it could be like art, but it's also like making a meal or whatever. It's putting something new out into the world. It gives you a sense of like, yes, this is like who I am. Like, look at that. Like, I just made that. That's all about me.
I could feel that. Natural entrepreneur for me as well. So constantly creating and showcasing and everything like that.
Yeah. So that's one example. And then you mentioned like being an entrepreneur, and for you, you have a couple gates related to being really like driven to want to pull yourself up and do well. It's kind of just this like drive of like, I'm going to like go out there and like make something and take care of myself. So, you know, even though this is like the really fun part, because like we're all so multidimensional, like even though you have this podcast about self-love and spirituality and it's quite feminine, it's like there's another part of you that's like also has the masculine principle of like, I'm going to do this.
100%. I would say that's super spot on. Yeah. With everything going on right now, I don't mean to like interrupt on the gates, just with our sense of it just kind of came to mind. So I just wanted to act on it of the revolution, if you will, that is kind of taking place right now as it pertains to our gates and things within human design. Are there certain gates or pathways that can kind of highlight how maybe we should be responding to what's going on right now?
Yeah, great question. This is a great one because we were talking earlier about how we all show up in different ways, right? Some people feel like, you know, they have a really strong voice and they've been, you know, an activist for 20 years. And so their message is going to be really different than the person who's like, oh my gosh, I just realized how much privilege I have. And let me look at that. And both are so important, right? We need both of those things to be happening. There's like so much I could say about that, but I'll try to like pick a few things. So like on one hand, I think the throat center is like a really straightforward one to talk about, right? Sure. Where if you have a colored and defined throat, you have a consistent message that's meant to be spoken about. And I think we also live in a society where there's a lot of praise for people that have a message or like have a thing, right? But saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure is maybe looked down upon a little bit. But some people, if you don't have a defined throat, whenever we're open, it means the energy is inconsistent, right? So it doesn't mean you can't speak. Britt, in your case, you also have an open throat. The gift of the open throat is that you can speak on behalf of others. The way you use your voice can vary depending on the situation. And if you're in, say, a group, you can kind of feel into like what needs to be said. And so that's one very high level way of feeling the pressure to speak is also like a not self thing of an open throat where it's like, I don't know. And so like, let me just get something out when like, what if it's just okay to not?
Exactly. I feel like in today's world as well, we feel so much pressure to say the most inspirational statement that we can say at all times. And it can just feel so forced. And again, that not self, whereas sometimes, I mean, silence can also speak greater volumes than trying to
Absolutely.
constantly respond with everything that goes on.
Yeah. Or even saying, I'm not sure right now, and having that be your truth versus grasping for some answer. People, there's an integrity, right? There's an energy behind your words too. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said. And then there are specific gates that might color how someone shows up. So for example, if you have more energy going on and say like your root center or your sacral center. Well, actually, I have an example that I'll share in a second, but let's say you have more going there, which is all about like the pressure to do things, get started. There's also some energy around like withstanding struggle. So there are some people who are meant to like draw a line in the sand and take a stance and like, you know, be really strong in that way. Whereas other people, their gates might be more focused on reminding people about the role of love and like reminding like there's love everywhere. Those are very different messages as well, right? And to not feel pressure that it's not okay to talk about love, or it's not okay, like it's not okay to be angry. So that's another thing. And then I'll just share for myself. Last weekend, I was at a local like peaceful march, and I'm a projector. My partner's an MG, and the way that showed up, he is very like into current events. So he was riled up all week, and he's like, you know, we're definitely going to go do something and like show our support. And then in his excitement, you know, that sacral energy, he was like talking to friends and like getting other people involved. And so all of a sudden we have a crew. And for myself, I'm like, okay, like I'm feeling like there's something that I can like join. And there's like, you know, I'm like invited. And then as we're making our signs, he was telling me about his ideas, and I'm listening, and he wanted to do something with like a fist, and he's like, I don't know the best way to draw that. And I was like, oh, we'll just print it out on the computer, make a stencil, and then we'll spray paint it. And that was like me again, just like being a guide, and they turned out like really, really nice, if I do say so myself. And yeah, and then we went, and so it's like, you know, his sacral energy kind of starting things, carrying things, but then me being able to plug in and provide value in a different way too,
and actually guide where that was going and everything like that.
Yeah,
that's so beautiful. I love that. Are there certain gates on your chart or within yourself that you've noticed that have kind of even maybe come more into play with starting your own coaching business and everything like that?
Yeah. You know what I have noticed is this was a couple weeks ago, I had finished giving some readings, and I felt this energy in my throat in a way that I hadn't. And I'm like, you know, I'm like been doing a lot of stuff. I like feel a lot of things in my body. And I realized because I had been using my voice in a way that felt so aligned, I was like just feeling this extra energy build, which I hadn't really noticed before. And I have a defined throat, and some of my gates relate to me kind of sharing what I believe is true about the world. And so a lot of talking to people about their charts is like, oh, you know, things can be in flow. That might be a subconscious block that you have. And so that was really interesting to have the felt sensation of that.
That is so interesting. That must have been really cool. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. I love the movement of things like that.
Yeah, because the energy that we feel, you know, we can't see energy, but it's still based in the body in some way. So there's this pathway.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so fun to feel it and everything. With looking at career, yourself as a projector, have you found that now that you are working for yourself, working from home more, do you feel more enhanced in a way, or just a deeper alignment with your true innate being inside of you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. So much. I feel like a different person. I know that sounds like a bold statement, but I wake up and I'm just like so grateful every day. And I mean, I've always had a gratitude practice, but there's just something about my reality feels more true than it ever has. I don't know if that like really makes sense, but that's just those are kind of the words that came to me.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like you are the right person now.
Yeah. And I'll share, that reminded me. Like I have a body worker that I see, and I saw him all throughout 2019 when I was like pretty burnt out. And I saw him literally the day before they announced quarantine was going to start. And so he saw me, this was like, maybe 2 months after I had left my job. And he was like, you know, there's something different about you. Like, it's not that you were, you know, shut down before, but I feel like there's like an openness to you where like, if I come into contact with your energy, there's a springiness. You're not trying to like have this thing up where you can't be like thrown around by the world, because now I can be more open. That's just like that was a piece of feedback I got.
That's so beautiful. I love it. It's like you're just fluidly now one with the universe and everything going through you. That's so cool. Even when we do fall into our true power and do a lot of healing work and things like that, there's oftentimes kind of those limiting beliefs or false identities that tend to pop back up in little trigger moments. Have you felt anything like that? And what have you kind of done to maybe shift yourself out of that or not go down that path entirely?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest, what's the word I want to say, like opportunity for that to come up has been growing my business. And I'm sure you've probably felt the same. Because it's really an edge for me to grow business on my own, right? Like having a corporate career, I was really good at it. And but doing something new, like I'm not good at it, right? So like just that in itself can be a little triggering.
Totally.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is this, I have like a voice of doubt that's quite strong. I'm like, this is new. Like, how do you know it's going to work? And I don't, right? Like I can't prove it in a factual sense, but then there's another higher self part of me that's like, just knows this is the direction I have to go, even if there's not certainty. And how do I get out of it? I think it's just all of the grounding practices, right? It's like having my personal kind of meditation and reflection and all of that, because all of that allows me to stay in connection to the higher self versus the ego mind, which is so useful for certain tasks, but not everything.
Yes, absolutely. Could not agree more. It's so nice too, once you do fall into it. And I've noticed as well with myself, even just playing around a little bit of days where I don't do the work, just the difference in that day or maybe that week. And there is such a subtle difference. It's crazy.
Yeah. I also want to add, I'm glad that there's still stuff coming up, right? Like how boring would it be if it wasn't?
Totally.
So, and I'm like, I still have a lot of life to live. Like I by no means think that I have plenty more layers to work through. And at this point, I'm like, at a certain point, you're like, oh, this is fun. Coming more and more into this truth, this authenticity.
100%. Even when you do get shown those little signs of kind of checkpoints, of I like to call them, of showing, okay, how far have we come? Like, are we going to go backwards or are we going to keep going forwards? It's fun to overcome those and work through them and know that, like you said, the work is never done. It's totally a journey. With human design and looking at career and everything like that, career can obviously be a pretty big factor of our lives, as that's what we do mostly 8 hours a day in all different environments. Are there any career, I guess just career types that are more prone to certain energy types, or does it not quite work that way?
Yeah. There are certain patterns. I'm not in the sense of like industry, right? Like, I don't know, reflectors should be doctors or whatever. But first and foremost, obviously, like following your strategy and authority is most important. That said, I believe that generators and MGs tend to do better in the office, like schedule. They have the potential. Like obviously, if you hate your office job, it's still not going to work. But this idea that you can kind of go in, and if you do like your work, go in at 9 a.m. and you enjoy your colleagues and everything's super fun, then no problem. Like work till 6, 7 p.m. and that can be a great life for some people, right? And I also think like if you get to a certain level, let's say you're in leadership where you can really set your hours, there's not the expectation you have to like be, at the whim of other people's schedule. I could honestly see any energy type doing well, right? So I was about to say, like, because manifestors, it's so important for them to do what they want. Having your own business or being your own boss could be really great. That's more of a function, it doesn't have to be the case. So that's one piece. I think for reflectors and projectors, again, this could have many forms, but the freedom to have solo time and space. So you could, again, be in an office job, but if it's one where, I don't know, half your team's remote and your boss doesn't sit in the same office and you can kind of like just sit by yourself, that could work great too, right? But it could also be working for yourself. So that's one thing I would highlight there. And then for the manifestor, just to circle back there, because manifestors know they know exactly what they want and what they need. And being beholden to someone else's whims is like especially angering and frustrating. again, that self-freedom is so important, whether that's having a boss that really gets you and is like, yeah, like I don't need to micromanage, you just do your own thing, or having your own business, or maybe it's like freelance work. All of those could be great options.
I could totally see that.
Sorry, what does your husband do for work? Do you feel like there's alignment there?
Yes, in the role that he does sales, is kind of his industry. In the water sports, he's an old pro athlete of wakeboarding and water skiing and things like that. And he was working as an independent sales rep for a company out of Seattle, Washington. He managed the whole Southeastern territory. So traveling on his own, kind of making his own schedule and everything like that. However, has recently shifted to selling boats here locally so that he can be home more, just trying to honor more of our relationship. We're both kind of moving away from constantly always being in a plane, in a car, traveling, everything like that, which was so awesome for a sector of both of our lives. But now, both of us are just kind of ready to be home more. Natural shift of life. So he is not in an independent role right now, but is kind of naturally like walking into that independent role at his job. So I would be very surprised if sooner than later he doesn't get promoted into more of a leadership position, because it's just like even the like some of the stories that he tells me, the employees kind of naturally are coming to him for advice and looking at him to kind of handle situations. And he is definitely that starter with an idea of like, okay, let's do that. But then can quickly turn as well and is almost like on to the next thing. So
I love it.
Yeah, getting out of being the doer and more into the leader definitely makes sense for him. And it's just, you can see it like naturally shifting, which I think is kind of cool and probably important for human design as well, to note that maybe you're not in something totally aligned for your design type, but if you can, see yourself shifting and moving, it's probably important as well.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, and that's why I wanted to ask, because like it could be so many different things. And I feel like sales in general, I didn't even think of that, but that's so great for probably many different types. Like even like a reflector could be great at it. Even a projector could be great at it. Right. Cause there's a lot of independence there. If you do well and hit your numbers, nobody cares what you're doing or where you are,
Right. Exactly.
And then there was another thing you said, maybe where you are in work isn't like the perfect thing, but that's also, there's so much we can learn wherever we're at. And this is kind of reaching outside of human design, but maybe you're working through like shadow issues. And so you can clean up your karma in the job that you have by realizing like you are good enough or whatever. Right. Or maybe there's something else coming, but like whatever you can do to like practice living your design in the job you have and setting boundaries, that can be a really amazing learning lesson, whatever. So there's also, I think, something there where often people who are maybe out of alignment feel so much pressure to like make a change immediately. It's like, that's also a form of control. Like it'll unfold as it needs to.
100%. With him as well, I don't know if it's true to the manifester, but it was really important that he made the decision for him. And it wasn't him making the decision like for me, or, oh, this is what I quote unquote should be doing. He spent a lot of time really trying to make sure that whatever decision he made, which he chose to take the new job opportunity, but in that time that he was making the best decision for him, which is kind of cool.
What a beautiful example of like a really healthy partnership too, though, right? Because I can think of a lot of people listening, or not listening, but just a lot of people who might feel like, oh no, but I want you nearby and like, you should do this for me.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that we work really hard on, is making sure that while we are a unified couple, that we're also our own individuals at the same time, because I can see how quickly people just get lost and kind of, probably even from a human design point, almost misconstrue the energy of being so close with someone in the same house, kind of making the same decisions. And you can almost forget or start identifying with that not self personality, or even bringing on more of their energy compared to your own energy, and feelings of frustration and just lost and everything like that.
Yeah, and that just makes me think of like, this is all a practice, right? Because we'll all have that happen to us sometimes, and then it's what matters is the ability to kind of get the perspective and be like, oh, maybe that isn't really how I feel about it or whatever, and then recalibrating.
100%. If you were in an elevator with somebody and they were asking you just kind of super quickly about human design and just the 5 different types, how would you, maybe in like a couple words or just a couple descriptors, describe each of the 5 different types?
Oh, okay. I haven't been asked this before, so this is all on the fly. Manifestors, big energy, here to do exactly what they want. If you want to join them, have fun.
Cool.
Generators, just like warm, glowy people. Beyonce and Oprah are famous generators. Enough said there, I think.
I love it.
MGs, powerhouses, will always make your life interesting because they're so into so many different things. Projectors. This one's hard because like it's myself, so now I'm kind of like getting tripped up about it.
It's like the hardest one.
Yeah, I guess like can deeply see into situations and people, ask them for advice, and make them feel seen and loved. and then reflectors. Oh gosh, misty unicorns. Here to be surprised and delighted by life.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. That was so fun. So cool. Before we start wrapping up here, as we're looking at all of our different types and with each other, it's different relationships and things like that, whether it is with your partner, in the workforce, with friendships, I guess kind of what role does human design play when it comes to relationships and connection and everything like that? Because I know for myself, just in understanding it, I'm like, man, every workplace should implement human design coaching into their workforce. And then I look at my friends and I'm like, wow, I would love for all of us to sit down in a big circle and just go through each other's charts and understand how to work with one another so much better.
I love that idea of like a human design party with all your friends.
Right? I think it would be so fun. You should totally start doing that.
Maybe I will. Yeah. Let me know if you want to do that.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the question was, how can it be important in relationships? And like, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's like so multifaceted, right? But because it's like when you understand someone else, all of a sudden you can be more empathetic, more accepting, more loving, right? If you just think about the experience you have of hearing your own chart and like, oh, I'm not, lazy or whatever, to be able to have that with the people you love who, we love them, but sometimes there's still conflict, right? Yep. So meeting people where they're at, really embracing and understanding their differences. I find like in my partnership, just knowing like, okay, he's being this way because that's how he is, or like, he's so excited, so let me support him there. I just feel like in relationship, we can show up for each other better. And so that goes for romantic relationships, but also friendships as well. And, family members. I think for work, it is a slightly different flavor because just the work dynamic is a little bit different. I think there it's like much more around how do we collaborate as a team better and how do we support each other when we're working on things. And it's like, sometimes there's like expectations someone will do something and maybe it's a different way. And then also learning how to manage the group energy better. So it's like knowing like, oh, this person will be really great at like getting the ball rolling. And this other person, let's definitely make sure that, she reads the final, like, whatever to get all the edits in. So that's like how it can look at work. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's something I really want to go into more as I grow my business. Is I know how much I needed it when I was in the workplace, right? Just to know like, because there's something around energetic diversity too, right? Of like, oh, I feel like right now there's an expectation that everybody should kind of function the same way energetically. But what if we could all be valuable and, worthy and productive, but it could look different ways?
100%. I think of myself too, back in just different office environments. And I would have loved just even understanding those who I worked with so much better as well. And having them been able to, from leadership perspectives, like you said, this is what you should be doing. This is what she should be doing. And then also just how we collaborate together, I think, and really for family members too, I think it would be so healing understanding, oh, this is why my parents are like this, or children. And there's, such emotional dynamics that go into that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the example that popped into my head while you're saying that is like, let's say there's a generator parent who has always felt like, yeah, just like work really hard, and do the thing you love and it'll be fine. But for some other, let's say it's like a projector kid, that's going to feel really terrible sometimes, right?
Yeah. Do you know what your parents are?
So neither of them actually know their birth times. In when they were born in the country they were born, like that just wasn't a thing. But I'm 99% certain my dad is a projector, because I remember when he was working and I was a kid, he would nap in his office every day. Like he just because he is a scientist. And so he would shut the door to his lab and just take a nap. That's definitely a projector thing, I feel like. And I'm pretty sure my mom is a generator just based on, she loves working and gets excited about things. So here's a small example. The whole sacral response, right? There's energy, there's excitement when you're doing something you like. And I find that a lot of MG's generators, when they're enjoying a meal or eating something they like, you can kind of tell in their body, like they're like making sounds or like moving or whatever. And I see that with my mom as well.
That's so funny. I introduced my parents to it recently. My dad, his times were a little off. So he kept going between a manifesting generator and a manifester. But my mom is a projector, and then me being a generator child, which I could definitely see her. I've noticed that I have a lot of projectors in my life, from close friends, my mom. They definitely seem to be there in more intimate relationships for me. All females as well, which is kind of interesting. Well, before we close out our episode today, one thing I do like to end with is some loving your own soul questions, which are just some on the spot questions just to help our listeners get a little bit deeper understanding into you and who you are.
Great.
So while we are kind of speaking of family relationships and everything, what was something that you loved to do as a child?
Ooh, I have always loved dancing and swimming.
Fun. What type of dance?
I grew up doing like a little bit of ballet and then mostly jazz, but now, like 5 rhythms, more like ecstatic dance stuff, I find is such a powerful sort of moving meditation.
Cool. I love that. Do you prefer lakes or oceans? Oceans. Yeah. What is your favorite weekend beverage?
So this one's tricky because I'm on this. Have you heard of the Bean Protocol?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm on the Bean Protocol, which is basically like not only no caffeine, but like no teas, not even like herbal teas. So I've been very Spartan with my beverages lately, but normally, because I try not to have caffeine, I do this iced chicory with like a homemade nut milk, and it is so delicious. And because like I miss coffee, right? Or I don't miss it, but like I like the bitterness. Yeah. And so just roasted chicory by itself has kind of like a similar taste, but without all the adrenaline.
All the added things that come with coffee.
Yeah.
I love that. That sounds so delicious. Next question, and we can totally skip it if you want, but have you done any drugs in your life? And if so, why? And what was the experience?
Yeah, I have. And I guess I'll just hit on some of the key experiences. So we had talked about like my health journey and disordered eating. And there was my first experience with MDMA was profoundly healing. And I wasn't expecting that at all.
Cool. Yeah.
I remember saying something like, oh my gosh, like if everybody had this, there wouldn't be war in the world. Like there's just something just like
I love that.
And then I remember looking at myself in the mirror and being like, how could I have thought all these horrible things, So obviously that didn't like last permanently. There was still a journey after that, but that was really profound. And then I've also sat in ceremony with ayahuasca a few times. And that was actually more recently. I had wanted to be in ceremony a number of years ago, but for various reasons, it didn't quite work out timing wise and logistics wise. And so when I finally did sit, I was really grateful about the timing. And I think, what they say about like, it'll find you when the time is right is so true, because being able to wait and then work through a lot of the bigger issues of, reclaiming my inner child and shedding some shadow. It just made the experience less, jarring in terms of like having a lot of like dark shit come up. I was like, okay, I worked through that. And then, so it got to be much more of like, I was aware of what wounds I wanted to really get closure on, as opposed to it being like an introduction.
That's beautiful.
So those have been some experiences that have been really powerful, and I'm so grateful for them.
I love it. I love what you said about ayahuasca too. I have not done it yet. I was feeling super called to do it last summer, like July, August, and then was thinking maybe in the fall, and then just different things took place that it never aligned for me to do it. And the curiosity has kind of come back. I haven't felt that deep calling, but I love how you said that it will find you when the time is right, because I truly believe that 100%. How many times have you had a ceremony?
So I've been in 2 weekend ceremonies, which like, I don't know if you want to count them like individually, but it's like, a few days each time. What's really interesting is, so after that, the most recent time was in January, right before I left my work. And I had a really interesting sort of like sober, energetic experience a couple of months after, where we're going deep now. So
totally.
I don't know if you are familiar with like yoni steaming. So it's like an ancient practice. And you just do like herbs and water and you steam, but you steam your whole yoni area.
Oh,
and
cool.
It's great for like, a lot of women do it after childbirth. That was not why I did it. I was trying to kind of like shorten some heavy periods and also just help heal hormonally.
Overall.
And when you do this, they talk about how you're bringing a lot of circulation down to the whole area, right? Like sort of sacral area. There's also like emotions that can be stored and released. And I had this really interesting experience where I had been steaming, and then I don't really get cramps too badly, but like out of nowhere, I had this insane like bout of cramps for like 30 minutes, to the point where like I was like, should I call someone? Like I was supposed to like go to meet someone somewhere. Should I call like my husband right now? Or like, this is really weird. Like I could barely get up to get some water. But then as I was in it, I was like, all right, this is happening. So I'm just going to surrender. And I had this sort of like vision of like grandmothers visiting, and like kind of like deep sort of like womb trauma being released. And it was just so wild, because it was like, I don't know, a Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. I'm on the bean protocol. Do you know how sober I am? Like
exactly.
And this thing kind of out of nowhere came. And I'm certain that it was because of all the steaming that had kind of released whatever it was. And
That's amazing.
And then it was over. No pain. I'm just like, do I go back to my day now? Like,
that's so wild. I would imagine as well that you also incurred so much healing for generations to come after you as well, if you plan on having kids and everything like that. But what an experience. That is so cool.
And I guess I mentioned that because it felt like an ayahuasca vision almost. And I'm certain that having those prior experiences like helped open up the ability to feel that or see that or whatever sense.
Yeah, I would believe that 100%. That's so cool. And I'm going to look into yoni steaming. I'm very curious about that now. Yeah.
It's like super, if you can like just buy some herbs and it can be super low key. Like you don't need to like get a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Cool. So fun.
Yeah.
Last question. When did your exploration to diving deeper into your own soul first begin, and how has it evolved since then?
I think it first began with like when I started doing yoga. And this is even before my yoga teacher training, like in high school, like so kind of trapped with like, the perfectionism and the disordered eating, and going to like, this is back in, the early, like the mid 2000s. So like, in my suburb, it was like a sweaty Bikram studio that just like smelled terrible. But that was like, and then like an old white guy in like little shorts talking about things. But it's like the seed gets planted, right? And so from there, what was the second half of the question? Just like how it's evolved?
Oh, yeah. And then just how it's evolved since then.
Yeah. I guess where I am now is I'm just realizing there's still so much more I don't know.
It never ends. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Looking back, is there anything you know now that you wish you knew previously, or maybe young you a couple years ago?
I think I would just say like, I know change is so scary, but there's so much waiting for you on the other side. So just do it.
I love that. Well said. Take the jump. For people who are interested in connecting with you further, where can they find you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch is on Instagram. I'm sure most people are on there. My handle is at victoriajane.hd, and you can DM me if you want to get in touch. Or I think you can also like click on an email button, whatever. I mean, just somehow you can just reach out. I would love to connect. And yeah, I think knowing human design is just can be so transformative. So if people want support in any part of their journey, I would love to be able to help.
Wow, that episode was so much fun, so much information. If you have been previously confused about human design, I hope that you should hopefully be able to have a much better understanding and awareness to it. Hopefully you've been able to understand your own type better. As Victoria mentioned, if you do have any questions, she would love to connect with you, help you in your journey. Again, you can find her on Instagram at victoriajane.hd. Definitely hit her up. Human design is just such a beautiful tool for all of us stepping into our true power, our alignment in this lifetime. And we really need, as a collective, everyone to do that more so now than ever. It's important. It's time for us to all kind of band together and, just understand yourself. It is such a fun road. So thank you again so much for tuning in. I have no doubt that you learned something new, a new perspective, understanding as it pertains to human design, and maybe even understanding a little bit better about yourself. If you feel called to rate and review this podcast, I would be forever grateful. It is truly the way that we can just get the messages and information out to more ears, more listeners, with the goal to really helping everyone tap into their own true potential and learn more about themselves. So if you feel called to leave a rating and review, I would feel forever grateful. In exchange, I would love to send you my 25 recipe plant-based ebook. So all you have to do to get that ebook is simply rate and review, send me a screenshot, and email that to lovingyourownsoul@gmail.com as proof. And then in exchange, I will send you back my 25 plant-based recipe ebook. Thank you all so much for tuning in here again today, and I look forward to the next journey.